In general, I think it's a good approach, right? I say that very like with a lot of caveats, right? I think it depends a lot on the culture of the organization where it's being used, and it may not suit some organizations' culture very well that has a really just highly collaborative sort of workforce in general, and that's a strong value. It may be the leaderboard isn't such a good play, but I think in general with sellers, they're competitive. They want to know where they stand. So that's why I think in general the leaderboard is a good thing. I think there's one dimension around time that you really have to think about when the cycles are very long. And so the movement on the leaderboard is going to be fairly infrequent. I would question more than how much emphasis is put on it. Like if it's showed very regularly, like weekly versus just a quarterly look at the leaderboard. I think that's the time dimension is important, because if it's a high velocity or high volume selling world, then the frequent views and sharing of leaderboard or just all-time access may be totally appropriate. But I think in big enterprise sales where even they could be longer than a year selling cycle, I don't know if the leaderboard is that valuable, because you see somebody on the bottom who may be doing all the right things, working on several very large opportunities, but they're at the bottom because the timing doesn't kind of align with their likely close date. So yeah, I think you got to think about those things: the timing of when deals close and the volume, and then of course the culture of the organization. But I think as a whole, in general, sellers, they tend to be competitive people. They want to know where they stand. That's why I think it's generally a good thing to do in some way. It just has to be thought out, like the frequency and availability.
I think if you think about the classic sales leaderboard, there would be a printout on the wall, in the office, where you would go up and look and you could see, hey, here's the number one rep. Here's what their, attainment or sales were. And sometimes here's how much money they get paid on. And then you would start to, run your finger down to find your name on that sales leaderboard. And let's say maybe you're 26th out of 100. This old school idea of a stack ranking sales leaderboard, I don't think is very effective, because the problem being that people only believe that they can make small incremental jumps and catch people. If you see somebody who's made 10 times the sales you have and they're number one every single month, there's probably not a whole lot of belief in your head that say, I can displace that number one person. And so one of the things that I've been a proponent of over the years is to break things up into cohorts. And so if you took that same stack ranking report, digitalize it, provide it to people on their mobile device, and show them maybe the 3 people above them and the 3 people below them, there's much more propensity that this is going to motivate somebody through a competitive spirit to say, hey, I can catch that person right in front of me. There may be one sale in front of me, $100 more in revenue, and I can jump up 2 spots type of thing. So I think that, studies have shown when you create a cohort of folks that are close to you in performance, it's more motivating than seeing people that are, really far away from you.
I think leaderboards can be effective, more so in a competitive sales environment. I think that they can be a huge driver of motivation and can be a big point of recognition and pride for top performers. And then, I think the reality is it also puts pressure on the bottom, because, generally no one wants to be towards the bottom end of that board. I think you do need to take into account culture. I think there's a spectrum on how you can set these up. In terms of a leaderboard and how much detail that you can show, but overall, I think they're more effective than not. In terms of like where it's trending, I think it is probably an area trending a little bit away, just given there are less sort of lone wolf, competitive, individualized sales roles out there that lend themselves like really perfectly to a stacked rank leaderboards with everybody's name on it. But I think there's still a really strong use case overall, and it's still very much a performance culture in the vast majority of sales organizations.
I find that the team-based leaderboards are very good when you have low morale, perhaps. And again, so President's Club is always going to be a thing. Individuals can see that they're doing well, and so the people at the bottom end of it have lower morale, they're not as engaged. And so seeing that they're part of this high performing team and they can see it on a leaderboard, I think can lift spirits ultimately. So that's where I think that the team-based leaderboards come in. The individual-based ones I find are not as effective. It tells you what you already know. The good reps do well, the bad reps aren't doing well. But I do think, there is something to the team-based leaderboards, but essentially it has to be connected to, like we were talking before, like a team-based metric. They have to be able to feel part of that team and feel like they actually contributed in order for it to do what you need it to do.
The other thing to think about when you get to this idea of leaderboards, to me, really comes to sales culture at an organization. And are you trying to foster a spirit of competitiveness within your reps? And have you hired people that are going to thrive in a competitive environment? And this is where, people will put names and dollar amounts on that report. Versus are you just trying to give people an idea of their relative ranking? Where do they stand, within the sales force, and trying to provide some extrinsic motivation from them through information? Then people will obfuscate and not show, that I'm in 25th place and Jeff is in 24th place, and that's the person that I'm trying to catch to move up the board. I think the last thing to consider with stack ranking boards is make it very clear, through communication to the sales force as to whether or not that stack rankings will have any impact in their ability to remain a rep at the company. Are you looking at it through the lens or viewpoint that the bottom 10 or 15% of those reps are going to be looking for another job next year? I would communicate that to the team. If that's not how you're looking to say who should we retain versus not, because maybe everybody on the stack ranking board has different levels of experience. Some people are new hires to the company, they're not going to be at the top. I would definitely communicate to people that this is not being used to determine who has a job at the end of the year or not, but make that very clear to the team of how it's being utilized to make management decisions.
There's a spectrum of how much you can show. So like on one end of the spectrum, you can have like a full stack rank leaderboards where I can see every person that's, in my peer group or in the organization. I can see their name, I can see their quota attainment, I can see everything. That's kind of the most aggressive, but I think you can really pull that back and you can start kind of masking and sanitizing it so that it isn't necessarily clear exactly who is each person on the leaderboard, but almost show up more of a benchmarking report for the sales rep so they can see, within my peer group, I am kind of X% rank, but I can't actually tell who the other people in my leaderboard are. So we've seen things like that that help temper it a little bit in terms of the other end of the spectrum.
People have debated leaderboards forever, but to assume your salespeople don't know where they rank, with or without a leaderboard, I think is probably foolish. I think the piece that we probably should start talking more about is gamification of incentives as opposed to just pure leaderboards. I think where gamification comes into play, especially as we think about kind of new generation they're more accustomed to playing games. There's more fun associated with playing games, where I think if you can gamify certain behaviors you want to drive, you don't necessarily need to pay for it. As long as those behaviors ultimately drive the quarterly or the annual target, I think we're going to start to see a little more gamification of activities, short-term pieces that make doing those activities perhaps a little more fun. And then ultimately, those still drive quarterly and annual sales.
To me, the big difference is, are you creating a sales culture of all the people that work for the same company, where you're creating a sales culture where if one person wins, somebody else loses? Where to me, in sales, depending upon the industry to some degree, that everybody can win at a particular company, because if they sell the solutions, services, product, goods or services from the company, they're going to get paid for that sale. And so it's not, maybe one person sells 5 cars in a month and another person sells 2. They both won to some degree because they got commission for selling those cars. If it's but again, if you're creating a culture where you're saying whoever is at the bottom of that board, their job is at risk, then I do think that is, creating an unhealthy level of competition where you're probably not going to be recruiting and retaining quality of salespeople that you want. And you're definitely going to be creating a buying experience that you may or may not want, because the level of aggression in the sales cycle is going to be amped up, and people on the buying side of that are definitely going to feel it. And so you have to think about, what is that prospect, client, customer experience that you want when they engage with your sales team? When you consider things like this, the design of the comp plan, the sales leaderboards, and how do you want to present that to the team? You're building a culture that's going to deliver an experience. Make sure it's the experience you want to be delivered.